Review. This review in part has been aimed at removing impediments to competition, of course. Competition was a topic that has come up quite a bit at the Global Food Forum, which happened in Sydney just this week. Charlie Blomfield is founder of Agricultural Management Company. It provides ag management and advisory services, and he's been in Sydney for the forum. So great to have you on the show today, Charlie. Usually speaking to you from Queensland, so welcome to Sydney, firstly. Yeah, competition, it was an interesting discussion. I saw reports of, anyway, I'd love your view on it, from the Coles boss, Ian McLeod, talking about how competition is one of the biggest barriers for us in looking at, you know, the Asian food boom which is happening, and whether we can be the food bowl, if you like, for Asia.
Yeah, I mean, competition is a big thing for agriculture at the moment, and we obviously are subject to the duopoly in the retail food sector. Woolworths and Coles have both been very good to agriculture in terms of buying such a huge volume of commodities, but they also need to satisfy a customer at the end of the day, so they're in an interesting position themselves. But as a whole, without Woolworths and Coles, you know, the agricultural industry would be out of a big buyer. But competition is not just about the retail. I mean, competition is also a big thing for us in the infrastructure space. So access to ports, and our main competitor there is the mining industry. So in particular in places like Queensland and northern New South Wales, access to the rail networks is hard with the mining industry. You know, coal has been taking precedence over wheat, and in particular cattle. There's virtually no cattle transported on rail anymore. It all comes via truck. The majority of commodities heads to port via truck, which is inefficient. So competition at that end of the scale in the infrastructure space is pretty critical.
And I suppose just thinking that we're coming off that mining investment boom, obviously volumes are still going to be large, but is there some kind of handover there that will assist the ag sector? You know, will the mining side of things almost make way for the ag sector? How does that work?
Well, potentially, but maybe not for a while. I mean, we've got coal and gas both going through the phase. Maybe the traditional mining industries have gone through their growth phase and are now in operations and potentially petering out over a period of time. But their use of the rail network is still quite high. There was never any overcapacity that we can really take advantage of in the agricultural space. So it may happen, but I don't see that happening in the near future. So
there's obviously, and we can talk in more detail about this, but there's obviously investment required in infrastructure and in ways to try and boost productivity as well. What generally would you describe, and coming away from that forum, as the mood around investment in ag at the moment?
Yeah, generally, I mean, the requirement for investment is the number one priority for any industry that's striving to grow and supply a big demand base. But there's a few restrictions around it. Most of our infrastructure here in Australia is state-owned, so we're restricted in how we invest in that infrastructure. So a private company can't necessarily invest in the rail network to improve it. So even if, say, the GrainCorp ADM deal did go through, they couldn't have necessarily invested directly into the rail networks as they were saying they might have, but so the government really needs to take some responsibility in investing into that infrastructure. There's been some proposals, maybe the funding out of Medibank might be used for some infrastructure, but whether or not that gets used towards something that can transport commodities rather than you know, people moving around, we're yet to see.
And I suppose the argument from your sector would be, if we want to make the most of this Asian food boom, it, you know, proceeds from, say, the likes of Medibank really does need to go to that.
Well, yeah, the proceeds from somewhere needs to go to that. And I mean, at the end of the day, we're about feeding people, so we've got to get that to market. And a lot of the commodities do have a useful life, so it's got to be done in an efficient manner. Cost has got to flow through the supply chain. At the moment, farm gate profitability is one of the core sort of issues for the government to be addressing, to make sure that the supply chain flows correctly and that farmers aren't lumped with, you know, the supply chain costs necessarily, and they can participate freely in getting the advantages out of the growing Asian sectors that we're going to be selling to. Okay,
so there needs to be more investment in infrastructure, and particularly in the supply chain. Yep. What can we do about the productivity issue, which was spoken about quite a bit yesterday? What are the options for investment, or how do we need to encourage investment to boost productivity?
Yeah, well, there needs to be a way for people to access the commodity and also access agriculture without necessarily having to buy GrainCorp. So the money needs to flow into the industry without being restricted by debt. without being restricted by regulation. So for innovation and productivity growth to happen, that money's got to flow freely. Productivity can mean anything from on-farm. We can increase water use efficiency, we can increase yields by doing a number of different things, but also importantly at the processing and manufacturing end of the chain. So our labour costs are so high here in Australia, we need to be incredibly efficient to get that step change, and to do that we need to invest. So the government needs to move into a role of supporting and facilitating rather than controlling at this point. It's always hard for the government to be playing the right role, but in agriculture they need to facilitate and sort of let the deals happen and let the money flow for if we're going to achieve the productivity growth that we need to achieve.
And a final question, I guess some people would say that this perhaps is one of the biggest barriers to investment in the Australian agricultural sector is well, in your words, there's currently a split between trade and investment decisions.
Yep.
I know
Yep.
Joel Fitzgibbon at the Food Forum was talking about the fact that, Asian investors have faced more scrutiny when it comes to investment in our ag sector, and maybe there's still some xenophobia when it comes to offshore capital that's coming here to go into ag assets. How real is that problem, do you think? And particularly knowing that we've got Abbott heading off for this trade mission to Asia just at the end of next week.
Yeah, I think the key issue is that we're still arguing about investment. We need that investment. We've had foreign investment in Australia since we first arrived here. It's no longer a point of discussion, I don't feel. We need that investment. It's not coming from Australia domestically. It's coming from overseas, and you can't demand conditions of trade without allowing people to invest here. Trade and investment goes hand in hand, so we can't be expecting for other nations to accept all our FTA conditions without allowing them to invest here freely themselves. So I don't see that there's actually an argument there. It's just that it needs to happen for the trade agreements to actually work.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, because in the end, it's the businesses that have to make these free trade agreements actually a reality. Thank you so much, Charlie Blomfield, who joins us from Sydney today, founder of Agricultural Management Company. Thank you.
Thanks.